Hello, and welcome to the Better Lifestyle Podcast. I'm Emma, your host. Today's episode is a very special and emotional one titled Healing the Family. We're going to talk about the importance of parent child relationships and how deep emotional wounds can shape our lives. If you're a parent or a child carrying pain from a strained relationship, this episode is for you. Parental love and support are so crucial. When that bond is strained or broken, it can leave scars that last into adulthood. Many of us carry childhood wounds, maybe a father who was never really there for us emotionally, or a mother we struggled to connect with. These wounds can affect our self-esteem, our future relationships, and even how we parent our own children. So, healing those wounds isn't just about feeling better, it's about breaking a cycle and living a healthier life. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today, Dr. Amanda Blake. Dr. Blake is a licensed family therapist and author of the best-selling book, Reconnecting with Dad, A Journey of Forgiveness. She has over 15 years of experience helping families heal from emotional estrangement. And on top of her professional expertise, Amanda has her own powerful personal story about healing the relationship with her father after years of distance. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on Better Lifestyle.
Thank you, Emma. I'm glad to be here. This topic is so close to my heart, and I'm really honored to share my story and insights with your listeners.
We're honored to have you. I know your journey and your work have impacted so many. Let's dive in because there's a lot of ground to cover, and I think it's going to really help people out there who are hurting. So, one of the things we want to explore is why so many parents, especially fathers, believe that providing financial support is the same as being emotionally present. I've heard from friends and listeners things like, "My dad paid for everything, he put a roof over my head, but I still felt unloved or unknown by him." Why do you think many fathers have this idea that financial support replaces emotional presence?
That's a great question and something I encounter often in my practice. Culturally and historically, a lot of fathers were raised to see themselves as the provider above all. They might think, if I'm working hard, earning money, and giving my family material stability, then I'm fulfilling my duty as a father. That role is often what they learned from their own parents. For many men, especially in older generations, showing affection or talking about feelings wasn't taught or modeled. It might have even been considered a weakness, so they channel all their love into working hard. My own father was like that. He'd often say, "Everything I do, it's for you to have a good life." He genuinely believed paying the bills and keeping a roof over our heads was how you show love. The intention is loving, but the execution leaves a child feeling emotionally empty, because the warm, supportive presence just isn't there.
Right? The child ends up with all their physical needs met but still feels something huge is missing. It's like you're grateful and you know your parent worked hard, but you still ache for actual connection. Growing up emotionally neglected is hard to even recognize as a kid because you might not realize what's wrong, just that you feel lonely or not good enough.
Exactly. When you grow up feeling emotionally neglected, you often don't have the words for it. You just feel a void. As a child, you don't think, "Wow, my dad is emotionally unavailable," because you might not even know what that means. Instead, you think, "What's wrong with me? Why doesn't my parent want to spend time with me or truly know me?" You start to wonder if maybe you're not lovable enough. I've had clients tell me, "I had everything I needed except the one thing I wanted most: a hug, a listening ear, a dad who asked how my day was." That kind of loneliness when he's around but not really there can be devastating.
He was around but wasn't at the same time. I think a lot of listeners will resonate with that. Perhaps a father was physically present every evening at home, but maybe he was always buried in work, watching TV, or just emotionally distant. You see them every day, yet you feel like you don't really know them, and they don't know you.
I can absolutely relate to that personally. My father was home every night by dinner time. We ate at the same table, we lived under the same roof. Technically, he was around, but in all those hours together, he barely spoke to me or asked how I was feeling. I remember coming home excited in 5th grade because I won a science fair, and I ran to tell him. He patted me on the head and said, "That's nice," then went back to checking emails. I slinked away feeling so small. He didn't yell at me or hit me or anything overtly hurtful. He was just absent in spirit. I learned not to bother him with my feelings or accomplishments because it seemed like he didn't care. So even though he was a good provider and a physically present parent, emotionally I felt invisible.
Invisible. That's a powerful word for it. No child should feel invisible. And yet so many do, even in seemingly good families where everything looks fine from the outside. You start asking yourself, is it me? Why can't I get dad's or mom's attention? If they love me, why do I feel so alone? Like you said, children often turn that pain inward, thinking there's something wrong with them.
Yes, they do. I know I did. I remember thinking, maybe if I'm extra good, or if I achieve more, he'll pay attention. I became a people pleaser and a high achiever, trying to earn his love with perfect grades and trophies. I thought if I did everything right, then he'd finally see me and be proud in a way I could feel. And while he was proud of my report cards, it still didn't result in more hugs or heart-to-heart talks. Nothing I did could draw out the affection that I craved. It was a painful lesson. You can't earn a parent's love. It has to come freely. But as a kid, you don't know that. You just try harder and harder until you burn out or break down.
And that kind of emotional neglect can follow a person well into adulthood. It's not like you turn 18 and suddenly those childhood wounds disappear. Let's talk about the long-term impact. How can growing up without that parental love and emotional support affect someone later in life? How did it affect you as you became an adult?
It absolutely follows you. Those early experiences sort of write a script for how you see yourself and how you expect others to treat you. For me and many people who grow up feeling unloved or neglected, there were a few big effects in adulthood. Low self-esteem and self-worth. I internalized the idea that I wasn't worthy of attention or love. Even as a successful adult, a part of me felt not good enough. This is so common. Children of emotionally absent parents often grapple with self-doubt. Difficulty with trust and relationships. I had trouble trusting others fully. If your own parent wasn't there for you, you might secretly believe no one will be there for you. In my dating relationships, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, thinking my partner would abandon me or not care about my feelings, just like my dad didn't. I've seen clients either become very clingy, afraid of being left, or guarded, not letting anyone get too close because they don't want to be hurt again. People-pleasing and emotional suppression. As I mentioned, I became a people-pleaser. In my 20s, I found it hard to say no, and I avoided conflict like the plague. That came from childhood, when I never wanted to upset my dad or demand too much. I see this especially in those who had to earn their parents' affection. They become adults who overextend themselves to keep others happy, often at their own expense, replicating the cycle or overcorrecting as a parent. Interestingly, some people repeat the cycle unconsciously. Without healing, a man who never had an emotionally present father might struggle to be emotionally present for his kids because he never learned how. Others swing the opposite way and overcorrect, becoming determined to be very present for their kids, which is healthier, but they might still carry that sadness inside from what they missed out on.
Those points make so much sense. Essentially, a lack of parental love and emotional support as a child can cast a long shadow over everything. How you feel about yourself, how you behave in relationships, and even how you parent your own children. I know listeners are probably identifying with a lot of those effects. The low self-esteem, the trust issues, the fear of abandonment, or constantly trying to make others happy at your own expense. It's a heavy burden to carry.
It is heavy. One more thing I'll add is anger and resentment. Many adult children carry a deep resentment towards that parent. On one hand, you might long for their approval or love even as an adult. You still wish, maybe if I get that promotion or achieve this, my dad will finally say he's proud in a way I feel. On the other hand, you're angry that you even have to try so hard. It's a painful push-pull. You want to love your parent, you really do, but you're also so hurt and angry that you almost don't know how to love or forgive them.
Let's dig into that because it's a huge struggle for a lot of people. Wanting to love a parent but feeling unable to forgive them. How do you deal with that conflict? For example, someone might say, I want a relationship with my dad. I do love him deep down, but I can't forgive him for never being there when I needed him. I'm still so hurt. How can someone navigate that?
First, I want to acknowledge that this conflict, loving someone but resenting them at the same time, is completely valid and more common than people think. You're not a bad son or daughter for feeling that way. In my case, I loved my father. He was my dad, after all. I have childhood memories where I adored him, like when he would take me out for ice cream once in a blue moon. That little girl inside me still yearned for his affection. But I also had a lot of anger and pain. Every missed recital, every time he shrugged off my feelings, I accumulated this stack of hurt that I didn't know how to let go of. One thing that helped me and helps many of my clients is understanding the parent's own background. Often, emotionally absent parents have their own unresolved issues or traumas. My father, I later learned, grew up in a home where his father was extremely strict and distant. He literally did not know how to be emotionally open because no one had ever been open with him. This doesn't excuse the hurt he caused me, but it gave me context. I realized his lack of emotional presence wasn't because he didn't love me, it was because he didn't have the tools to show it. Sometimes just recognizing it wasn't that I was unlovable, it was that my parent was wounded or limited in this way, can soften the resentment a little and make forgiveness feel more possible.
That's a powerful insight. Understanding that it wasn't about you being unlovable, it was about them not knowing how to love in that way. It reframes the narrative. It doesn't erase the pain, but it can start to chip away at that wall of anger, making room for empathy or forgiveness over time.
Exactly. And forgiveness is a process, often a long one. You might forgive in your mind one day, and then something triggers an old memory, and you feel that anger all over again. It's not linear. I always tell people, you can love your parent and still hold them accountable for the hurt they caused. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying, it was okay that they hurt you. It means you're choosing to release some of that burden of anger for your own healing. It also helps to set realistic expectations. In my case, I had to accept that my father might never become the warm, emotionally attuned dad I wished for, but I looked for small signs of change once we started working on our relationship, and I learned to appreciate those while still understanding his limits.
So, it's a balance of holding them accountable, but also perhaps lowering expectations of them suddenly becoming a completely different person. And forgiving, not for them necessarily, but for yourself so you're not carrying that poison around forever. I imagine actually taking steps to heal the relationship, if one chooses to, is another huge part of this. Let's pivot to that, the steps to begin healing. For someone listening who's thinking, yes, that's me. I have this pain with my parent and I want to heal. How do they even start? What would you say are the first steps toward healing a fractured parent-child relationship?
Great question. Healing is definitely possible, but it takes courage and effort from one or both people. In my experience, there are a few key steps to begin healing. Open communication. Someone has to break the silence about the issue. This might mean initiating a heart-to-heart conversation with your parent or child if you're the parent. It could be face-to-face, a phone call, or even a letter if speaking is too difficult at first. The goal is to honestly express your feelings in a respectful way. For example, Dad, I appreciate all you did for me, but I need you to know that I felt very alone and unloved growing up. It's a vulnerable conversation to start, but opening up that line of communication is crucial. And if you're a parent trying to reconnect, it might involve listening without defensiveness. Be ready to hear your child's truth even if it's painful. Forgiveness. Over time. Like we discussed, forgiveness is more for your peace than for the other person's absolution. This step might mean actively working through resentment, maybe with a therapist or through journaling, so that the past hurt doesn't control you. Forgiveness doesn't happen in a single moment. It might be something you have to practice regularly. Sometimes you might need to forgive in absence, meaning you choose to let go of anger even if the parent hasn't apologized. Other times, forgiveness can happen after you receive an apology or see genuine effort from the parent to change. Either way, it's about freeing yourself. Remember the saying, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You release the anger so you can heal, whether or not you maintain a relationship with the parent. Setting healthy boundaries. This is so important, and people often overlook it in their eagerness to reconcile. Boundaries are about protecting your heart while it's healing and ensuring that any renewed relationship is healthy and respectful. For instance, you might decide, I'll call my mom once a week, but if she starts criticizing me or dismissing my feelings, I'll politely end the call. Or if you're the parent trying to reconnect, maybe a boundary for you is, I won't push my daughter to hug me or say, I forgive you, right away. I'll give her space and time. Boundaries ensure that you're not reopening yourself to fresh wounds without safeguards. They create a framework where trust can slowly be rebuilt. Over time, as the relationship improves, some boundaries can be adjusted, but it's absolutely okay to say, I'm choosing to talk to Dad about certain topics and not others. Or, I will spend time with him, but I won't tolerate insults or denial about the past. It's part of healing to protect yourself.
Those steps are extremely helpful: communication, forgiveness, and boundaries. I like that you laid them out clearly. It gives people something concrete to hold on to. Let me just recap them quickly. Open communication. Start an honest, respectful dialogue about what you feel and what you need. If you're the child, speak your truth gently. If you're the parent, be willing to truly listen and acknowledge your child's feelings. Forgiveness. Work towards forgiving the past, not to excuse it, but to release yourself from the grip of that anger and pain. It's a gradual process, and it's okay if it takes time. You might forgive in small increments. Healthy boundaries. Set rules for interaction that keep you safe emotionally. This might mean limiting certain conversations or behaviors. Boundaries make sure that any renewed contact doesn't just repeat old hurtful patterns.
Well summarized, Emma. And I want to emphasize, healing doesn't always mean you will have a super close relationship after. It might, as in some cases, and that's wonderful, but even if the relationship only improves a little, or even if you decide not to continue a close relationship, healing can mean finding inner peace and understanding. Sometimes healing is an internal process. You forgive and let go inside your heart, which frees you, regardless of how the other person responds.
Amanda, you've been sharing bits of your personal story throughout, but I know it's a profound journey. Would you mind sharing a bit more about your personal experience healing the relationship with your father? How did all of this play out for you in real life?
Sure, I can share more. It's emotional, but I think it will resonate with people. So, as I mentioned, my dad was emotionally distant throughout my childhood. By the time I was in my late teens, I was carrying a lot of bitterness. In college, I actually stopped calling home except for holidays. I just felt like, what's the point? We'd have superficial chats, and I'd get off the phone feeling worse because he still never asked anything real. After I graduated and moved out, I think we went almost a year without speaking beyond a quick check-in. In my mid-20s, I hit a low point. I was struggling in my romantic relationships, I couldn't form a lasting, healthy relationship, and I was also dealing with bouts of depression. I went to therapy, and that's when I really confronted how much my unresolved pain with my father was affecting me. My therapist gently encouraged me to consider reaching out to him, not necessarily to absolve him, but to get closure for myself, one way or another. It took me weeks to get up the courage, but I decided to write my dad a letter. In the letter, I poured my heart out. I told him everything, how I appreciated the roof over my head and the fact that he provided for me, but also how deeply lonely I felt my whole life. I wrote, "You were there, but it always felt like you weren't. I needed you, Dad. I needed you to show me you loved me, to hold me when I cried. And you didn't, and I have been angry and hurt for a long time." I also said that despite all of it, I wanted to try to have a real relationship moving forward, but if we were to do that, we needed to truly talk for once.
That must have been such a hard letter to write. I imagine there were a lot of tears as you put those words down.
Oh yes, I was trembling and crying as I wrote it. It was like years of dammed-up feelings just flooded out onto the page. But after sending it, I actually felt a little relief, like at least I've said my piece. I didn't know how he would react. Honestly, a part of me feared he'd ignore it or dismiss it, because that's what he always did with emotions. A week went by, then two, with no response. I started to lose hope. But about a month later, he called me, which in itself was unusual. I remember my heart pounding. I picked up and there was a long pause. Then he basically said, I got your letter. I didn't know. I'm sorry. His voice was shaky. It was the first time in my life I'd heard my father sound vulnerable. I was in shock. This stoic man was apologizing to me, acknowledging my feelings. I actually couldn't speak for a moment because I started crying. That phone call was our first real conversation. He admitted that he didn't know how to be the kind of father I needed, and that he thought working hard was how to show love because that's what his father did. He even said, "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now I hurt you and I'm sorry." Emma, hearing those words, it was like a weight I didn't even fully realize I was carrying got lifted off my chest. We both cried on the phone that day, and it opened the door.
Wow, I have chills listening to that. It's so touching picturing that moment. After all those years of silence, finally both of you in tears, connecting in a way you never had before. It's amazing how a single honest conversation can start to change years of built-up hurt.
It truly was amazing. Now, I'd love to say, and then everything was perfect. But real life is messier. After that call, we slowly started talking more. I visited him, and we had some heart-to-heart talks in person. It wasn't easy. There were times we slipped back into old patterns, and I had to remind him, "Dad, you're doing it again. You're zoning out." Or I had to fight my own reflex to shut down if I felt a hint of rejection from him. But little by little, we made progress. He started asking me questions about my life. He even attended a few sessions with my therapist and me, which was huge. One day, maybe a year or so after that initial call, he gave me a hug when I was leaving his house. Not a brief, awkward hug, but a real, warm hug. I think I hadn't been hugged by my father like that since I was a tiny child. I broke down crying in his arms, and he just held on. It felt like we were both healing in that embrace. Him from whatever held him back all those years, and me from the years of feeling unloved. Our relationship today, I'm happy to say, is so much better. He's in his 70s now, and we talk every week. He never became super emotionally effusive. He's still a reserved guy by nature, but he expresses care in his own way, and I feel it now. I've forgiven him, truly, and I also think I've helped him forgive himself a bit.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Amanda. I'm really moved, and I'm sure our listeners are too. It's a story of hope that even after decades of disconnection, a father and child can find their way back to each other. Not every story will look the same, of course, but hearing that it's possible will give a lot of people courage.
I hope so. And I want to stress, even if my father had not responded as well as he did, I would have still been glad I spoke my truth. Because healing isn't dependent on the other person's reaction. It's about you releasing what's been pent up. In some cases, parents might not apologize or change much, or maybe they're no longer alive or in your life. You can still go through similar steps, writing a letter you don't send, or talking with a therapist, to find closure inside yourself. The door to healing isn't locked unless we lock it. It can always be opened from our side.
That's a great point. You took the initiative to heal for your own sake, and it fortunately also healed the relationship. But even if someone's parent isn't willing or able to engage, the child can still heal internally. I'd like to shift a bit to speaking directly to some of our listeners in different roles. What advice would you give to parents who might be listening and realizing, "Oh no, I've been that emotionally absent parent"? Maybe there's a father out there who thought working 60-hour weeks and paying for everything was how to love, and now he's recognizing he's a stranger to his kids. How can they begin to fix this from the parent side?
I'm so glad you asked that. To any parent listening who sees themselves in this story, first of all, it's never too late to try to reconnect. Here's my advice for those parents. Acknowledge and apologize. Have a humble heart-to-heart with your child. It could start with something like, "I realize now that I haven't been there for you in the way you needed, and I am so sorry." A sincere apology can be incredibly healing. Don't follow it up with excuses. Just let your child know you recognize the hurt you caused. This shows them that you hear them and take their feelings seriously. Ask and listen. Ask your child to share their experiences and feelings. Then really listen. This might be very hard to hear because it can feel like criticism or failure, but remember, it's even harder for them to say it. Try not to get defensive or minimize what they say. For example, if they say, "You never showed up to my games and it made me feel worthless," fight the urge to respond with, "Well, I had to work." Instead, say, "I understand. That must have hurt you and I regret missing those moments." Be present and patient. After apologizing and listening, show that you're committed to change by being present now. That might mean regularly checking in on them, asking about their day, showing interest in their hobbies or feelings. Consistency is key. Your child, whether they are 15 or 50 years old, might not warm up to you immediately. They might be suspicious or distant at first, thinking, "Why do you care now?" Be patient. Prove through your actions over time that you truly want a relationship. Healing on their side might take time, just as your process of changing does. Consider therapy or counseling. Sometimes having a family therapist mediate those first few tough conversations can help. It's not a sign of weakness to seek help. It shows you care enough to do whatever it takes to make things right.
That's excellent advice for parents. Acknowledge the past, listen without defensiveness, be consistently present, and get help if needed. I think any parent who sincerely follows that will at least give their relationship a fighting chance to heal. Now, on the flip side, what would you say to children, whether they are teens or adults now, who are struggling with resentment toward their parent? Perhaps they've heard your story and think, "That's nice, but my dad will never change." Or, "I'm too hurt to even consider forgiving." How can they cope or start healing on their own terms?
I have so much compassion for those children because I've been there. To them, I would say, your feelings are valid. First and foremost, know that you're not wrong to feel angry, hurt, or betrayed. Don't guilt yourself for feeling this way. It's okay to acknowledge that pain. You needed and deserved love that you didn't fully get, and it's natural to feel resentful about that. Allow yourself to feel and to recognize the wound for what it is. Seek support. You don't have to go through this alone. Consider talking to a therapist who understands family dynamics, or confide in a trusted friend, partner, or support group. Sometimes just voicing your experience to someone who listens empathetically can be a huge relief. There are also great books and resources like podcasts such as this about healing from childhood emotional neglect. These can help you feel understood and give you ideas for coping. Focus on your healing, with or without them. Like we discussed, you can start healing even if your parent isn't actively involved. You might write letters to express your hurt. You can decide to send them or not. You can practice forgiveness in small doses. For example, maybe you start by silently wishing yourself peace, and then, when you're ready, wishing them healing for whatever made them the way they are. This doesn't pardon their behavior, but it helps you move forward. Remember that forgiving someone doesn't mean you have to invite them back into your life full force. It can simply mean you're releasing the hold their past actions have on you. Build your own happiness. Sometimes, when we've spent so much of life aching for a parent's love, we put life on hold around that pain. Take steps to build a fulfilling life for yourself outside of that shadow. Invest in friendships, hobbies, creative outlets, or your own children if you have them. Creating positive experiences and relationships now can gradually fill some of that void from the past. It shows you that you are capable of love and are worthy of love, because you absolutely are. Stay open, if safe. If your parent does try to reach out or make amends, consider staying open to it, even if cautiously. People can change, sometimes in surprising ways. Staying open doesn't mean not having boundaries. You can be open-hearted and still insist on respect and emotional safety. But being open means you haven't locked the door and thrown away the key. If reconnecting is safe and possible, you may find some peace in giving it a chance. And if it's not safe or healthy to reconnect, that's okay too. Your priority is your well-being.
That's beautifully said. The common thread I'm hearing for children of emotionally absent parents is that your healing is your own. You didn't cause your parents' behavior and you couldn't control it as a child, but now you do have the power to mend the wound within you, with or without their participation. And you deserve to heal.
Absolutely. Everyone deserves to heal and to find peace. I want to add that healing is not about blaming or shaming our parents relentlessly either. It's about understanding and growth. In my journey, I had to move from a place of just blame, "Dad, you failed me in XYZ ways," to a place of understanding, like, "This is what happened, it hurt me deeply, but I'm going to rise above it and not let it define the rest of my life." It's empowering when you realize that while you can't change the past, you can change how it lives on in you.
This conversation has been so deep and heartfelt. Thank you, Dr. Amanda Blake, for sharing your wisdom and your story. There are so many takeaways from this discussion. I want to recap a few key points for our listeners. Growing up with an emotionally absent parent can cause deep wounds, feelings of invisibility, low self-worth, trust issues, and lingering resentment. It's not your fault, and you're not alone in that experience. Parents often think providing financially is enough, but children truly need emotional presence. Being there in spirit and mind, not just in body, is what makes a loving parent-child bond. Healing those wounds is hard but possible. It starts with open communication, taking the brave step to express feelings honestly. It involves forgiveness, which is a gradual process of letting go of anger for your own sake. And it requires healthy boundaries, so any renewed relationship is built on respect and understanding. If you're a parent who realizes you've been distant, know it's never too late to say, "I'm sorry," and start listening and showing up. If you're a child who feels resentful, your feelings are valid and you can heal inside whether or not your parent changes. Support, counseling, and self-care can guide you through it. Ultimately, the message is one of hope. Healing is possible even after years or decades of pain. Dr. Blake's story shows that a broken bond can be mended when both sides are willing. And even if you only have control over your side, you can find peace. You might be listening with tears in your eyes right now, thinking about your own mom or dad or child. Maybe this inspired you to make a phone call, or to write a letter, or to forgive yourself for something. It's never too late for a new chapter in your family story.
To everyone listening, be gentle with yourself. Family wounds cut deep, but you are not defined by those wounds. With time, honesty, and compassion for yourself and maybe even for that parent who let you down, you can start to close those old chapters and open new, healthier ones. I've seen it happen with many of my clients, and I lived it myself. There is always room for healing and even reconciliation if both parties try. And even if one party cannot or will not, you still can heal. You deserve that freedom.
Thank you again, Amanda, for giving us so much insight and heart. I want to end on this thought. Healing the family starts with the courage to face the pain and the belief that love, in whatever form it can take, is stronger than anger. To our listeners, if this touched you, maybe share it with someone who might need to hear it. Start that conversation in your own life. If you enjoyed today's episode of Better Lifestyle, please subscribe or follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. We tackle all kinds of important life topics to help you improve your life and relationships. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this talk about healing family wounds, do share it with them. You can also leave us a review. It really helps to reach more people who might need encouragement. Remember, no matter what your past looks like, you have the strength to shape your future. Healing is a journey, and every little step counts. Thank you for listening to Better Lifestyle. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye.